G'day and welcome back to episode number 33. Today's episode we're going to talk about how to take car photos using your smartphone, whether that's an Android, iPhone, doesn't matter what it is. You're going to share some tips here. We're going to talk about capture techniques, lighting, what else have I got here? I've got some notes, background, angles, interior photos, editing, and then we're going to talk about the buyer persona because you might be taking photos to sell your car, so the buyer persona. And then different stages of awareness and or the experience of the buyer and how you can tailor your photos to match that. Now, the reason this came about, all these tips and techniques that I've researched, was a workshop that I delivered to a car sales yard, and they had the whole team there. There was actually 12, 13 people there, which was brilliant. They actually had me up on a big screen on the wall and running around with their phones. Someone had a webcam, having me chasing around on a webcam. It was quite a unique experience. I haven't run a workshop like that before, but it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. So I thought I'd jump in here and share these tips with you. So first of all, the difficulties. What's difficult about taking a photo of a car? Well, it's stationary. It's inanimate. Is that the word? Inanimate. It doesn't move. It has no life, no character. Well, it does have character. We're going to touch on that. Some cars do have character, and you really want to emphasize that. And it's so competitive. If you're selling your car, it's so competitive to sell cars. I mean, people look at the mileage and kilometers and the odometer and reading, and that's so people have a basic checklist. But when it comes down to colors, things like that, you might have a red car, and they might not have even considered a red car. But the way you photograph it, they might go, wow, you know what? Red's pretty cool. Red stands out, or you might change something about it, might just make them go, you know what? And you might influence their decision to buy or consider your car. So a lot of basic things. We experience life at eye level, take photos of a car at eye level. It's like, yep, cool, another photo of that car. What I would recommend, first of all, is get onto Google and type in your car, the make, model, and then go into Google Images, and you might see some interesting perspectives or interesting shots that other people have taken that you can replicate. But if you don't do that, I've got quite a few things here. So capture techniques. First of all, I've got my notes here, so I'll just move this across so that I can see what I'm doing here. Hold your smartphone close to something on the car that makes it unique. So it could be the bonnet. So it could be something on the bonnet that looks really cool. There could be a grill or the wheel, something like that. That's something that's directly linked to that. Like I have a Dodge, so for me, the grill at the front is quite unique, and that's one of the things I love about it. Doesn't necessarily look like a family car, even though it is a family car. It has a kind of a meaty kind of cool look to it. So I would. And other people might think the same way. So I'll take a photo and get in nice and close to the grill there. So holding it nice and close. And then when you hold your phone in nice and close, you remember you have that distance to camera to lens to subject distortion. So it might be a little bit out of proportion to make it stand out. Also, if you're getting nice and close and you tap it, you focus on that point, the background will blur. So position the car somewhere where you've got a really long, distant background, and the further the background is, the more it will blur. Instead of in your driveway, right up against your garage door or something like that. But we'll talk about background in a little bit more detail. So when you tap the screen, a lot of phones, whether it's an iPhone, Android, they all work slightly different. Tap the screen will focus a lot of them, and then swiping. Once you tap it, you activate the light, the exposure slider or the brightness slider, and swiping up and down, left or right, depending what phone you have and which way you're holding it, it will change the direction. And sometimes that can and I typically, generally on most of my phones, I will actually reduce the exposure, so I'll swipe down to make it a little bit darker. Panoramic mode is really cool. So panoramic mode, now with a lot of phones, we have an ultra-wide lens built into it. If not, you can get a Strumon Optics cinematic wide-angle lens, has edge-to-edge sharpness, no distortion around the edges, and panoramic mode with one of those attached, or the ultra-wide mode on your phone. You can create some pretty cool-looking panoramics. Just another capture technique. the panning shot is really cool if you can get a panning shot. So there's two different ways. One, you can safely, very safely, be in another car driving along and then be alongside or slightly off center with the other car, and then tap on the car, focus on them, and then take the photo. And what will happen is the car is traveling at the same speed as you, so that'll be nice and focused, but the background will be going past at whatever speed you're doing, and you don't need to be going fast to make this happen, and it'll blur, and you'll get that really cool looking blurred trailing background. And that can appeal to a buyer who is after the car for performance. It might make it look like a fast car, but we'll cover that a little bit later. But again, just do it safely. Now, if you're stationary and the car goes past you, then what you can do is rotate or follow the car, point your phone at the car, and then rotate at the hips. Keep your elbows in, nice and steady, and you just rotate as the car's going past. Tap the shutter on your phone and continue. And it's the big thing: continue moving with the car. And then what will happen? Same principle. The car will be in focus, and because the background is the thing that's moving, that will become blurred. So that's a different way of doing it. Another capture technique is, it's not really a capture technique, but a way of setting up an interesting shot is a puddle. So having a puddle in the foreground and then having a reflection of the car in the puddle can be a bit creative because you want your photo to stand out from everyone else. So that's a great way of doing it, is having that. And it depends on the context of the scene. A puddle might look good, it might look a bit weird, but yeah. And if you're taking puddle photos, remember, hold the phone upside down and as close to the water as you can to get a really, really cool puddle. And backlit also for those puddle shots, on Instagram, the puddlegram. So that's the best way. Have the car isolated from the background so that it really stands out in that puddle. While I'm talking about lighting, yeah, like I mentioned, the backlighting is really is super cool. It's especially with the sun flare in there. A sun flare can look really, really cool in there. And so backlighting, because with backlighting you kind of have a bit of a halo around it, and you just be mindful that when you have strong backlighting that the car could be underexposed and dark. So just a balancing act there. And you can always add a sun flare using an app like PixArt. So and there's so many different types, but that's my favorite that I recommend for both Android and iPhone. All right, another thing with lighting, avoid middle of the day photos. Now, the reason why I say that is because if you have a look at your car outside during the day, you'll see on the windows, you see all the reflections of the clouds. And that gives it that kind of milky washy. That gives it that, well, let's just stick with that. You get the reflections of the clouds in the windows, and it's not as nice. So two ways of getting around that is, one is a polarizing lens. So you can get those circular polarizing lenses. There's so many of them out there. One that I really, really like if you're not using a lens attachment is NISI, N-I-S-I. And they have a clip-on system. It's the exact same glasses. They're expensive big camera filters. It's a bit awkward putting it on there, but it works really well, and that'll cut through the haze and some of the reflections. The other is choose a spot out of the direct sun. So you might find a shady spot somewhere where there's no overhead. Some really cool shots are those shots going down the road. Speaking of reflections off the windows, where you have, you've seen those photos down the rainforest or through tree-lined streets where you can see all the leaves above, and then the leaves reflect off the windscreen. So those could look really cool. And when you do that, if it's low light like dusk or sunrise, put the headlights on. Can look really, really cool as well. Looks like a magazine shot. They're fantastic. All right. Another is obviously park in a shaded spot. I know that sounds really silly, but and obvious, but somewhere where you're shaded and out. So there's a lot of car parks that have sunshades, so you can get into some of those car parks for shopping centres early hours in the morning when no one's around, or on a Sunday morning before everything opens up. Might be a good time to get into some of those spots. Alrighty. Like I said, those times early in the morning and afternoon are really good. Blue hour is also really good. So blue hour is like the hour after sunset. Depending on the car, if you're taking a photo of like a city commute kind of little car, those nighttime shots are fantastic because those people are active at night, driving around at night between places. So you want to try and I'll talk about this a bit later, but you want to try and match the photo to the lifestyle and the personality of the person that might buy your car. And if it's you, if you're just taking photos of your cool new car. So, but golden hour is fantastic for that lighting I'm talking about with the clouds and that sort of thing. All right. Next one that I want to cover is background. So, like anything we take photos of, we want to try and have a clean, distraction-free background. Non-cluttered, not busy, bring all the attention back on the car. Now, that said, these are photos, so you can always go in and use an app like Retouch on both Android, Google Play and the App Store. It's like $2.99, and you can go in and you can actually swipe your finger paint over things, and it'll pick up areas around it and fill it in. So if there's something in the background that's distracting, pulling the eye away from it in the edges or whatever, that's a great app. But if you can, try and set it up so you have a distraction-free background. Contrast color. So if your car is a bright color, if it's a red, then getting somewhere where you've got green foliage, because that's what we call split complementary. So they're on opposite sides of the color wheel. And on my website, I've got a couple of articles there about color theory with photography, but it makes it pop. It makes it really stand out and jump off the screen when you have that contrast color. That said, you might want to have something that kind of blends in with the environment and not stand out as much, because you might be looking for a buyer who doesn't want a car that stands out. You want one that's to kind of blend in. It's not all about look at me. And there's plenty of people like that buy cars. All right. If you've got a white car, white is fantastic. Pops against a lot of things. One cool photo that I saw online was this person took the photo of their white car in an underground car park, reversed up against the wall, and then they had their foot on the brake. And what that did was that created a red kind of halo and background behind the car, and that looks super cool. It looked really sporty, even though it was just kind of parked there and not doing anything. All right. Next I want to cover is angles. So angles for those more masculine type of cars, like what we call here in Australia, utes or trucks, shooting from a lower angle can be really cool, because the bottom of it, it's always the grille and the bumper and bull bar and all that sort of thing that's really meaty and big and chunky, and big thick tread on the big tread and chunky wheels. So getting down nice and low for a low angle and shooting up, you kind of emphasize those, because again, things that are closer to the lens look bigger. So those things get look bigger, out of proportion, and taper towards the rest of the car. So that looks really good. A small size city commute vehicle that I talked about before, you might want to emphasize that small little car by shooting from a higher angle, shooting down at the car, and make it look less imposing. So so that's the best way. Now, depending on if you're selling your car, depending on where you're actually selling it, there might be restrictions. Well, there might not necessarily restrictions, but there will be go-to photos that you have to have as your cover photo. So there might be a photo where you have to take it from shooting at the angle, the corner, I should say. So where you get the front and the side of the car in the one shot. So there might be so wherever you're selling it, just make sure that you tick all the boxes and make sure you've covered everything. So that's probably the most popular angle, is the corner, and it's for good reason. It's really informative. It shows you what the front of the car and the side of the car looks like. Like a photo just from the front shows you just the front. So you've only covered, a quarter of the car instead of half of the car, what half of the car looks like. Now, in most cars, one side of the car the passenger side looks the same as the driver's side. So you don't need to do all that. So you might be able to cover the front and passenger side in one photo, and then another photo you can cover the back and the driver's side. So in two photos, you can cover the whole thing. So they're kind of the most common. And then you've got the profile shot, which is just the side of the car. And so one of the reasons why the corner shot works is you have what we call 2-point perspective. So, and it looks and that's what makes it look three-dimensional. So things that are closer, like that corner looks closer. As you look towards along the side of the car, it tapers and eventually will head to a diminishing point, a bit similar to the parallel lines of a train line. When you see that and you see the train lines just kind of converge into a converging point or diminishing point. So cars do the same thing. When you take that angle shot, is you'll see the kind of taper off towards the back, and that gives it depth. And so that looks really cool. That's one of the reasons why that one's so popular. Another thing to consider is having someone stand next to the vehicle. So that adds a human element, because people will look through photos of car, and one of the things we notice and pick up on is faces and people. It's kind of a primitive thing. It's a self-preservation thing that we see people and we kind of look at them and take notice, because we kind of just think, oh, okay, what's that person? Who are they? What are their intention? What's the story? So it's engaging. So it provides scale for the photo, but it also provides that human element. Attracts your attention. So that could be really cool, depending on what the context of why you're taking photos of your car. Yep, so that's that one. And I've covered this one already, a close-up photo of a unique external or internal feature. So there might be something inside the car that looks really cool and is quite distinctive to that make or that model. And it could be the steering wheel, might have an emblem or something like that in there that looks really cool. A vertical photo as opposed to a horizontal, so a vertical shot can look really cool. What else have I got here? Headlight glare shot from directly front at a lower angle can look really amazing. Incorporate the environment. So environment could be the road, and use the leading lines of the road. The center of the road, you've got those center lines, or the edge of the road, you could use that as a leading line and lead you to the photo, to the car. Is another way. Just experiment with different distances. So you might want to fill the frame, or you might want to sit back a little bit and take a photo that incorporates some of that environment that you're sitting in the car in. All right, next. This is quite extensive, isn't it? Next is interior photos. So now we're looking at opportunities to capture textures, angles, the material the seat's made out of, the dash. Is it all plastic? Is there wood grain in there? Something like that. Is it automatic, manual? So you're providing information, but you're also, there might be between models, there might be something that, okay, for the upgraded version of this car, you get this included. You might get GPS navigation or something like that. So that's really cool to kind of do that. Throwing a little, this is a bit of, it's something a little bit different, is throwing a bit of extra light in the footwell, so that when you take a photo of the dash and the interior, you don't just have that shadow of just a blob of the footwells. I see that all the time. So just have a torch or something like that you can just put a little bit of light in there, and it'll actually brighten up those shadows. And so people can, I don't know, it's two-edged sword. One, then people kind of look to there as well, but you don't really want to. And by having just the black blobs in their footwells that are too dark, kind of brings your eye back to where you want in the interior. But you want people to experience this the way they would if they were sitting in the car and looking in the car as well. So it's just experiment. There's no right and wrong with that. But with editing, you can brighten up the shadows and do that anyway. Okay, I've got here interior photos. Another thing to look out for if you're using those ultra-wide lens option on your phone, or a wide-angle lens, or a fisheye, just be mindful that when you do that, especially if you're shooting on an angle, you might play around with proportions, and proportions might start to look a bit funky. So that's why a lot of those interior shots are shot from the back seat in the middle, looking straight at the dash, so that everything in the photo is the same proportions. So just something to be mindful there. Fisheyes, it can be really cool, but whenever I use a fisheye, I end up cropping because I don't like that circle kind of frame. All right, next, editing. Let's get into the editing. So you can make a car look like it's moving, and I released did a YouTube video on this a little while ago, and basically I used PixArt and Afterfocus were the two apps that I used, and it was fantastic. It's nice and easy. So PixArt was what I used to make the wheels look like they were spinning, And then after focus was what I used to make it look like it was motion blur, what they call motion blur. So it looked like the car was actually driving. So the before and after photo looked pretty cool. Alrighty, so that's editing to make it look like it's moving. You can add blur using those. You can use portrait mode or live focus or other camera mode on your phones to blur the background as well, so that your attention just comes to there. If you don't do that at capture, that after focus not only has motion blur, but it has what they call Gaussian blur. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but it has blur that you can blur the background as well. And you can adjust the brightness, saturation of the vehicle. And when you get into Adobe Lightroom, I have an ebook on that, Adobe Lightroom, where you can get into the color mix. And say your car is red, you can go in there and select red, and you can make it look more saturated, desaturated. You can increase the luminance, like the brightness of the red, or decrease. It's so cool. Or you just use the target tool and pick something in the background. You can mute the colors and so that's a lot of fun to get in there. I also mentioned before, retouch. You can get in there and remove distracting elements. Another one, if you want to pixelate your number plate, you can use an app called Pixlr, Pixlr. It has a brush that you can use to pixelate things, which is really cool. That was actually one of my very first videos on YouTube a few years ago, before I really got into YouTube, and it's had like 3,500 views on that, and it's like so old, and I'm so embarrassed I want to take it off. but that's a great app, Pixlr, to pixelate the number plates. That seems to be something that people are interested in. All right, next, I want to move on to the buyer persona, because I've mentioned a few times now about selling a car. And most people, when they take photos of their car, that's what they're doing, is they're selling it, or they've got a new one and they want to capture the memories of the car. So if you're doing that, a couple of extra things to be aware of is who is buying your car, and then matching the photo to that. So it could be performance. So if it's performance, you can position your vehicle over the center lines and look like you're swerving and cutting the corners and accelerating and all that sort of fun stuff. If it's comfort, then you might want to have some interior photos, and you might want to show off what's inside the car. If it's service or reliability, then customers arriving at the service center in their car, or that sort of thing. Features and connectivity, then close up of the dash. Those lifestyle shots can look really cool with the vehicle using those connected apps and that sort of thing. The next step is the purchase experience. It's like anything that you buy online. You think about the demographic, and I've touched on before about having somebody in the car. So if your demographic is a P-plater or new driver, then you have someone of that age. If it's somebody who's retired and they want their weekender car, then put someone in there with that sort of demographic in the photo. So that's a great way of showing who the ideal customer and buyer of that car is. Think about the buyer journey. So think about the stages that we buy things. We go from awareness, so we're not really aware of what we want, to then we are, and then we go into consideration, then we're into our decision phase, and then you've got your existing brand owner. Like myself, I've had 3 Commodores. I've had 4 of those. Dodges, this is my second Dodge, and I'm really sad that I don't make them anymore, so I'm not going to have to find something else. So you're also appealing to those that already own that sort of car. So that's quite a lot we covered. But like I said, it was a fun workshop, and I put together all these different techniques and tips, and I probably won't deliver another workshop other than their follow-up one to a group like that again. So I thought I'll put together an article on the website, which I will, so we covered capture techniques, we covered lighting, background choice, different angles, which again is kind of capture techniques, some interior photos, and editing. The buyer persona as well, we covered on that. I think it was important to cover that as well. So that's about it. So if you've got any questions, hit me up. You know how to get in touch with me. Smartphonephotography.club is where the membership is. It's a great place for you to get access to all the podcast episodes, YouTube, all my unlocked full tutorials, the forum, where we do daily tips and photo themes and all that sort of cool stuff. So thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you again soon. Bye-bye.